Hello, it's Sam from Threads of My Life. Just popping on to do another tutorial, this time raw edge applique. This is another technique that I love using in my art quilts. I've got some examples to show you before I start. This was a bird that's currently on the red list of birds in the UK, and I've just cut the shape of the bird, and there's no fusing on the back of this, and then stitched it down, just catching the edges, and then embroidered into it. And I really like the effect of that. It's quite effective effect. The second one I've got here, this is one of my most recent pieces. It's my meditation scroll from Garlic Lane. And here I've raw edge appliqué down some lace and some net and some crochet, and then here again with decorative stitches, just strips and offcuts of some of the naturally dyed fabrics that I made, and that goes on. And I've used it on the silk. It looks really lovely. A sort of a mending technique as well that would work really nicely with. And here, and I like the way the fabric frays or doesn't fray depending on what it is, and the edges that appear just from the way the fabric behaves. So you can have a really nice play around with that. And on my most recent piece, the one I'm working on at the moment, this is again all raw edge applique. I love these raw threaded edges that just do their own sweet thing, and then this here gives such a beautiful texture, and the lace. Right, I'm just using a piece of calico for this tutorial. I have actually ironed it, makes a change. And I've got some scraps here, all sorts of things from cottons and linens, and some t-shirt material left over from a t-shirt quilt I did. But I just thought I'd show you what the effects you get with different stitches. I like to use, for raw edge applique, I mostly like to use regular sewing thread. So I've got some here. Again, a colour hopefully that will show up. And my needle. And I just wanted to show you the different effects you get depending on what fabric you choose for your raw edge applique. The obvious one and the easiest is felt. This is just a piece of regular felt, probably synthetic. I think it came in a pack. But for this, you can, again, you've got your knot at the end, come in from the back, and similar stitch to what I did with the needle turn, but without turning it. And you're just going around through, oops, catching the edges. So you can make a decorative stitch. You could do, if I turn the corner, do a different stitch. Again, because it's felt, it's just, you don't really need to think about it. It holds its shape beautifully. It's not going to fray, but you could do a blanket stitch. Bit of a wonky blanket. Never mind. Here we go. So something simple, and you're just trying to just catch it down, and you can make your stitches as decorative or as invisible as you like. But I just thought I'd do a couple of options on here to show you. The other thing with the felt is that it just is useful to, because you don't have to fuse it, you can cut it really small and you can do intricate shapes with it, use it for lettering, or more shapes that you would normally fuse fabric so you don't get the edges fraying. The other thing you could do is, let's just finish that off there because I think I'm going to move on to a different one, is to use a bolder stitch with a more obvious thread, like the pearl cotton. Oops, I'm using my pin. Never mind, it's all sewn down now, mostly. And you can just make those stitches as fun as you'd like. Again, in from the back. This is probably the quickest one. We're getting down blocks of colour or, like I said, intricate shapes. The felt really, really helps with that. And again, you could probably machine it. But for mine, it's always by hand. Right. What happens if you pick something that does have a fraying edge, like a linen or a cotton? So I've got some linen here, and this is a cotton linen. I might choose a tiny shape because that's what I like about the raw edge. You can literally use up all your little snippy bits. I will start with that one. I'll pin that in place. And I'll stick with this thicker thread because it's on the needle. But here I might make a little patch effect. So in from the back in a corner. And I'm going to come in about, I don't know, 2 millimeters from the edge, 3 millimeters, and just do some rows of stitching. And this is a patching technique, but it gives such a lovely texture. It's worth doing, and it's probably the most straightforward. And you can vary the weights of thread. So I've used this with some very fine threads, almost invisible, just to provide the texture. And then I'm going to go back here. I'm not going to go around the edge. I'm literally going up and down. And if you patched something that was going to get washed, you would get fraying. I quite like that. If you didn't want it to fray, you could again choose some felt, or you could put something fusible on the back. Oops, little knot there, but that's okay. I know that's not going to be too dramatic. Well, it suddenly is. Oh, and there you go. This is the reality of it all. Oh well. Oh no, it's got another knot. There we go. Let's just go with it. Obviously you wouldn't normally do that on your own stitching, but it's not the end of the world. to stab yourself either. Not doing very well here, am I? Never mind. And then one more row, just squeeze that on. And you could, depending on the look you're going for, you can either line up your stitches so that they're all in rows, or you could again make them into that little like sashiko and bow inspired crosses and things. But for this one I'm just sticking with some simple running stitches backwards and forwards because I like that texture. Wrinkles and crinkles. Next, so with these little patches, so these are all the little snippings that you might have left over from cutting corners or seams or little bits, but the raw edge applique really does lend itself to using up these little bits. And I'm going to go for a finer thread this time. I'll go with a darker colour. But you don't have to be too precise with your cutting, because you want those little frayed edges to give it some personality. I like that anyway. So for this one I might just, similar to the one I've just done with those repetitive stitches, just to make sure it's really secure on the fabric. That pin's already annoying me. You could use a dab of fabric glue if you wanted, but I mean for something more intricate. Oops, pen. Needle's gone now. And it will fray, and you will lose the definition. What should we do? I'm going to come backwards and forwards, I think. And we'll try and line them up a bit more. I love the sort of ancient feel that you get with a raw edge applique. Not pulling too tight, but you can see that lovely texture forming. You can play around with your needle to get the stitches to line up better. But how lovely that you can use up those tiny, tiny scraps that might otherwise not see the light of day again, or indeed end up in landfill or used to stuff something. Here they become something beautiful to be celebrated. You also notice that I haven't used the right side of the fabric. I've flipped it over. I'll show you what I mean. Because just because there's a right side doesn't mean you have to have that showing. Sometimes, I will go a little bit. Sometimes the most interesting side is the wrong side, or the reverse. Do a little knot on the back. Snip. So you've got your thing there. So this is the other bit of fabric. That's the right side. I love that washed out effect that you get here. Now a really useful one to play with is t-shirt material. So this was left over from a t-shirt quilt, regular cotton jersey, probably got a bit of like grease stuff in. If you cut a narrow strip, this stuff doesn't fray, so you can, doesn't matter if it's too jaggedy. But here you have your little bit, but if you roll it a little bit in your fingers, you get these little tubes, and they're quite fun. Where should we pop this? Maybe there. I'm just going to pin it in place. And I'm going to, instead of stitching it at the edges, I'm going to do one row right down the middle. All the little bits of thread go in my thread jar, and I will use them for couching or stuffing. They get used and they get saved. So if I just start at one end, again I've got my knot, I'm coming in from the back. I'm coming a little bit further this time, and I'm going to eyeball it down the centre line, and it is tricky to sew through by hand, but I'm not doing a huge amount, so it's not the end of the world. Probably thinner thread or finer needle might have helped, but for this demonstration I think this will be fine. I'm just doing a simple running stitch down the eyeballed centre of that strip of jersey t-shirt fabric. Then, again, not too close to the edge. Lovely rolly curved effect, which I had on the art quilt that I'm just working on. Another favourite thing to raw edge applique is little scraps of lace. So here are some naturally dyed with, I think this was oak leaves. This was a little bit left over from my Garlic Lane project. And again, you just find a little area that might look pleasing. Quite linear now, isn't it? Come here. What I like about the lace is that it really does lend itself to this. But I am going to use a fine thread just because I like the hiddenness. This is my Aurifil 80 weight fine hair stuff, which I think will show up a bit. And I am going to need that little bit of thread, thread my needle. I do a few more twists on this one, because it's so fine and it will come through the fabric otherwise. And again, starting from the back, and I am going to go fairly close to the edge, but you've got that honeycomb structure of the lace. So what I like to do is just catch, and it is fiddly and it is fine, but I go up through quite a long stitch on the back, the honeycomb hole, down the one next to it. So you've got a tiny, tiny stitch that is just catching the lace. Doesn't matter particularly which direction you go in, but I've got my tiny honeycomb, if you can see that. And I've just come up here. I'm going to come down next to it. You can get such a lovely, it just feels so delicate when it's with the lace, and you're just catching every so often one of the little honeycomb structures. Let's see if I can put that in the light better. So you can just see that's come up there, and I'm just coming down. I'm catching just that little bit. You could make more of a feature and do this sort of stitching, which I've done before on other pieces. I just wanted to show you something different with a raw edge. I think for an art textile, you can play around with these raw edges more. I think a quilt that was getting washed, you might want to think about fusing or embracing those edges. Like with the jersey, that would work on a regular quilt that would be getting washed. And it would curl more as it gets washed and used. But for art textiles, I think you don't have to follow the rules so exactly. You can experiment and play and see what happens. It's quite fiddly. And you probably do need your glasses on. But we're nearly there. What's gone on here? There we go. A little tangle. Might be able to hear the wind outside. It's quite breezy today. At least the sun's trying to shine. There. You can see on the back this trace of a line. So again, big stitches on the back and the tiny, tiny catching stitches through those little honeycomb holes in the lace. You can get a really, really lovely line and embrace those cut edges of lace. Having said that, I love those raw edges. I do, but I am picking off some of them that I don't like the look of. They're maybe detracting. And that's it for this one. Very simple, very straightforward. Play with those stitches, make them a feature or not. Play with the types of fabrics and the weights of fabrics that you have, and embrace those tiny scraps, and you can use them up with your Edge Appliqué. Thank you.